The dark days of 1940. When war was declared in September 1939, Kenley was still a grass airfield. Although you could fly Spitfires and Hurricanes from grass, and indeed the R.A.F. did in the Battle of Britain in 1940, the problem was if the British weather intervened and the airfield became waterlogged, the great danger was that during takeoff, mud would be thrown up by the propeller into the radiator intakes. The engine would quickly overheat, and suddenly you had a very expensive glider. Over the cold winter of 1939 to 40, builders moved onto the airfield and hurriedly built 2 concrete runways, a perimeter track, and 12 E-shaped blast pens to protect aircraft dispersed on the ground. In May 1940, work had been completed and Kenley was fully operational. Its squadrons of Spitfires and Hurricanes had returned in time to cover the desperate evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force from the beaches of Dunkirk. Once that operation had been successfully completed, Britain stood alone against the might of the German war machine. The most powerful army the world had ever seen was just across the English Channel, poised to invade. Britain stood alone, and the world waited to see what would happen. The Royal Navy was the most powerful navy in the world, and would certainly have inflicted enormous casualties on any German invasion fleet. However, the truth is that had the R.A.F. been defeated and the Luftwaffe gained air superiority, Hitler wouldn't have needed to cross the English Channel under fire. He would simply have bombed England into submission, while U-boats blockaded our vital shipping lines. It's a fact that had the R.A.F. lost the Battle of Britain, we would have been invaded. We would have lost the war. This is a photograph of the officers' mess at Kenley, which was built in the early 1930s and is a fine example of the historic aviation architecture which still exists at Kenley. Kenley is, of course, by far the best preserved Battle of Britain fighter station. This is the entrance to the fuel dump at Kenley. Fuel Bowsers would drive in here, be filled with aviation fuel, and then driven out to where the fighters were dispersed around the airfield, at readiness, available for immediate takeoff. This is the rear of one of the surviving blast pens at Kenley. 12 of these were built around the perimeter track, and each could protect 2 fighters. They offered a considerable degree of protection against the exploding force of a bomb landing nearby. This picture shows the rear exit to one of the fighter blast pens, which leads into a reinforced concrete bomb shelter. There were also 2 entrances at the front. The reason why there was also a rear exit was simply to cover all eventualities in case of fire, which was a very real possibility in 1940. Here we are at the front of one of the blast pens. The blast pens were basically an E shape and could accommodate 2 fighter aircraft. At the rear, you can see the entrance to the bomb shelter, which was not only used during air raids, but also for storing equipment and as a shelter in bad weather. The important thing about this photograph is not the modern rubbish sitting on top, but the concrete base, which would have been the site of a wooden dispersal hut where the pilots would have sheltered and relaxed while waiting to scramble. This is a close-up of some of the brickwork on one of the blast pens, which aptly illustrates the erosion that's taken place over the last 70 odd years. In 1940, there was a desperate urgency to build these blast pens, and the cheapest building materials were used. It's quite amazing they have survived since the Second World War, but it does amply and graphically illustrate the challenges that we face in restoring and conserving the surviving fabric of the airfield. This collection of rusty metal is, in fact, the remains of an electricity substation which provided Kenley Airfield with power during the Second World War. Every year we hold a Kenley Heritage Day with replica Spitfire and Hurricane aircraft, classic military vehicle and model aircraft displays, live music, a barbecue, classic cars, a tasting of 1940s food, and generally a lot of family fun. Every Heritage Day we invite veterans to come along and visit the airfield. Here they are outside the Portcullis Club, which, as well as being the home of the local Royal Air Force Association branch, is also the oldest surviving building on the airfield, having been built in the early 1920s. August the 18th, 1940 is remembered as the Battle of Britain's hardest day. Each year, on the Sunday nearest to the 18th, Kenley Airfield enjoys a flypast from the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight.